airport next to baggage claim, we got a text message that Democracy Now! Videographer, filmmaker Elizabeth Press, who had arrived before us, had been arrested, or she had been detained, or she was in a house with eyewitness video, and somehow the group was surrounded by police. That was the last details we had. We had the address of the place they were texted to us, and we raced off. Armed groups of police in the Twin Cities have raided more than half a dozen locations since Friday night in a series of preemptive raids before the Republican convention. The coordinated searches were led by Ramsey County Sheriff Bob Fletcher, but conducted in coordination with federal agencies. 5 Minnesotan activists are still detained on probable cause holds, which means they can be held for 36 hours without charge, excluding weekends and public holidays. According to this timeline, they won't be released before Wednesday. The sheriff called them, quote, criminal anarchists who are intent on committing criminal acts before and during the Republican National Convention. The raids and detentions have targeted activists planning to protest the Republican National Convention, as well as journalists and videographers documenting police actions at protests. Groups directly affected by the raids include Food Not Bombs, the RNC Welcoming Committee, Eyewitness Video, and Communities United Against Police Brutality. Democracy Now! Spoke to Michelle Gross from Communities United Against Police Brutality on Sunday. She was at the activist Convergence space Friday night when it was raided.
I was sitting there waiting for a meeting to happen with other legal people. We were working with a kind of a collective of legal people, and we were waiting to have a meeting. And I was literally just sitting there drinking some water and relaxing when, you know, these Ramsey County Sheriff's Department people came blazing in, screaming, "Get on the floor! Get on the floor!" and waving guns at everybody in their faces. And they basically, at the time, I quickly thought and opened up my video camera and hit my record button and started recording the scene. Then, because they were, you know, waving guns in my face, of course, I had to hit the floor, but I kept my camera recording the whole time.
For 45 minutes, then released. But when she returned home, she found her home and car had been broken into and all her documents thoroughly searched. Democracy Now!'s Elizabeth Press and Eyewitness Video founder Eileen Clancy were among those detained in one of the raids in St. Paul Saturday afternoon. We arrived on the scene soon afterward. Eileen Clancy spoke to us and other reporters from the backyard of the house where she was being held. She was handcuffed with her colleagues.
They've been detaining people for days around here, and they photograph them, they look through your materials, they copy your materials, and don't return them to you, and then you're merely detained. So you don't have the same situation where you have police officers swearing out an affidavit, which we could prove was false. This seems to be a new technique.
Eileen Clancy was sitting with her hands behind her back, handcuffed, surrounded by St. Paul police, along with her colleagues who had been inside the house. She was shouting to us across the yard. The police had said we had to stay in the front, across the street. But the next-door neighbor of the house where the activists, the eyewitness videographers were inside, told us to go through her house, the next-door neighbor, and we could stand in the backyard to speak and witness what was taking place as the eyewitness videographers were brought into that backyard and were handcuffed. The National Lawyers Guild and Communities United Against Police Brutality filed an emergency motion Sunday asking Judge Mark Wernick to grant, quote, injunctive relief to prevent police from seizing video equipment and cellular phones used to document their conduct. The group sought a temporary restraining order on police to stop them from illegally detaining journalists and confiscating equipment. I'm joined here in St. Paul at St. Paul Neighborhood Network by Bruce Nestor from the Minnesota chapter of the National Lawyers Guild. We're also joined by Colleen Rowley. She's worked as an FBI special agent for almost 24 years. In 2002, she was named Time Magazine's Person of the Year after she blew the whistle on pre-9/11 intelligence failures. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Let's begin with you, Bruce Nestor. What is going on here? One raid after another throughout St. Paul. What are these preemptive raids? What does that mean?
It was really an effort led by the Ramsey County Sheriff to put people in preventative detention. The raids were carried out by Sheriff Bob Fletcher, who had been arguing for months that there needed to be a stronger law enforcement response, and he was being told that wasn't necessary. And so he sent his officers in after doing intelligence gathering and infiltrating these groups. And then really what he did is he took common household items that you'd find in any home in Minnesota, a hatchet, rope, glass bottles, and rags, attach the label anarchist to the people who were living in the homes, and then raise this public fear that the anarchists were threatening violence, public disorder. But really it's taking a common household item, something you'd find anywhere, calling it an edged weapon, and then attacking people for their political beliefs that then is used to generate this public fear and keep activists detained, as you said, through Wednesday at noon.
This situation that we witnessed in St. Paul, where eyewitness video was surrounded by police, they moved in on the videographers with a weapon drawn. Democracy Now!'s Elizabeth Press was inside. She was filming. The police came in with their weapon drawn on these videographers.
They did the same thing in the house raids in South Minneapolis. They broke down doors even though these were knock warrants, meaning they were supposed to knock and announce themselves. I was personally present and saw officers with riot gear and assault rifles, pump-action shotguns. The neighbor of one of the houses had a gun pointed in her face when she walked out on her back porch to see what was going on. There were children in all of these houses, and children were held at gunpoint. Everyone was forced to the floor and handcuffed, and then detained for about an hour where they were processed out and then individuals were released. It was really an overwhelming show of force, again, designed to heighten public fear, to do two things: to make people fearful of the protests, but also to discourage people from protesting. I think it's somehow designed to say, you know, don't take to the streets because this could happen to you, or you could get caught up in this, and therefore don't get involved. And that's why they have that level of force involved.
Colleen Rowley, you're a former FBI agent. As I talked to Elizabeth, our producer here in St. Paul, one of the people who was arrested or detained at Eyewitness, it seems that they're all careful not to arrest at least this group, but detain them for hours. They're handcuffed. One of the protesters, his arms were red for hours afterwards. But she said that before the police came in, the FBI was there. What is the role of the FBI in this? Who is doing this?
Well, I can tell you what it's supposed to be, and then I retired in 2004, and so these fusion centers have grown, of course, since that time, and who knows what it actually now amounts to. What it actually is supposed to be is in a major event such as the RNC, the FBI is really to take the lead on the counterintelligence aspect, which, of course, if there was a true threat, let's say there was a domestic terrorism group, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about at the very most nonviolent civil disobedience. So the confusion with true intelligence for a terrorist threat is quite enormous. There's a big range there. But in a real case, obviously, if you really did have, let's say, the Aryan Brotherhood or something like that, a group bent on terrorism, the FBI is supposed to take the lead on that and coordinate the intelligence gathering.
What is your experience with preemptive raids?
Well, the word preemptive, of course, should send a red flag up, because that word came into play right before the Iraq War, and of course we all know that it's very, very difficult to determine ahead of time what is a true threat. And so when you start this word preemptive, and now, unfortunately, it seems to have migrated to domestic law enforcement. You cannot determine, we always talk about intent and capability, and if you really know that a group is going to pull off a bank robbery, you really have to make sure that an overt act is committed in furtherance of that. It's not enough to know, for instance, that somebody's talking about a bank robbery. So that's a problem here, and certainly when you get into satire and taunts and this type of thing, it seems to be terribly misguided and an overreaction on the part of police. And it has terrible consequences actually for policing too, which I can talk about later. here. People put this, they try to say, well, security, we must sacrifice civil liberties. They think of it as a trade-off, and it is absolutely not true. Our security does depend on good police work, and so when police do this and they go against their own community policing model, they actually sow distrust, so that if they do want to ask a question of someone next time, let's say there is a true threat, somebody may say, I don't want to talk to you, I know what happened last week when you handcuffed people incorrectly. This is just sending a very bad signal to police work, and I'm sure there are many police officers who are just as disappointed with this, because it's going to make their job in the future much more difficult.
As the police were surrounding eyewitness video and Elizabeth Press, I asked the